Okay, right, last time we finished mid-chapter where Clara had gone with Robert into town to deliver the food to the soldiers. Now, Robert didn't seem too convinced and pleased that Clara had to come, but Mr. Gilbert was like, tough, you've got extra work, she's coming. So that was a little bit suspicious. So they were just coming into town, and that's where we left it. Robert flicked Kitty's reins hard and she trotted on, faster than before, away from the funeral and past a huge stone archway. There is an abbey gate, said Robert, following Clara's gaze through the archway to the formal gardens beyond, where people were walking, huddled up against the gusty wind. On the opposite side of the road, a woman was half running behind two small boys in tweed caps. One had his legs twisted around a hobby horse, which had a red handkerchief tied around its neck, whilst the other was chasing him with a toy rifle. Bang! Bang! The boy with the gun yelled to the horse rider boy. You're killed! They were giggling as they ran along a cobbled street, stretching up a hill. Clara stared at the street sign, Abbeygate Street, the location of the frame maker's shop. She brushed the tips of her fingertips against a tapestry in her pocket, wondering how she was going to escape from Robert to visit it. She glanced at him. Robert was watching the small boys, the little brothers. Clara curled her nails into her palm. Where does your family live, Robert? Robert's fingers tightened on the rein. I don't have any family, said Robert, his eyes sliding away from the little boys and towards Clara. His face was stony. Oh, said Clara. I'm sorry. I thought there's nothing to be sorry about, said Robert sharply. My parents are dead. So you don't have any brothers or sisters? Remember, we know that he has a brother. A muscle of the side of Robert's face twitched. Clara held her breath. No, Robert said. Why the lie? He pushed his spectacles onto his nose and sniffed. Sorry, Clara. I find it hard to speak of these things. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry, Clara said. Robert was doing his best to protect Will, but the worry of looking after his younger brother must be eating away at him. The silence between them stretched until she thought it might snap. Robert's hand gripped the reins so tightly his knuckles reminded her of snow-capped mountains. Kitty rounded a corner, narrowly missing a man crossing the road with a yapping terrier. Hey, watch out! Shouted the man. Robert ignored him. Clara bit down the bottom of her lip. How could she make things better between them? You're doing such a good thing organising these fruits and vegetables for the hospital. A flush stole onto Robert's cheeks. Well, it was the Earl's idea. I can't take all the credit, he muttered. Yeah, but Mrs. Gilbert was saying how proud she is of you. After your disappointments, Clara clamped her mouth shut. She was prying again. Robert rubbed his nose. The flush of had molted his neck like a nettle rashel. The thing is, Clara, and you'll learn this when you are grown, you can get over some disappointments, but others stay with you, perhaps forever. Clara stared at Robert for a second, then looked away. Chapter 23. Hospital Blues. We're here, Robert said, bringing Kitty to a halt in the street just around the corner from the Abbey gate. His face seemed a little lighter as he hopped down from the cart and looped Kitty's reins around a lamppost. Good girl, he murmured, stroking her mane. We shan't be long. Ivy coated the front of the 3-storey hospital and crept over some of the windows too. The Union flag and the Red Cross flapped on its white flagpole, 2 flags Clara had grown to know well since the war had begun. Robert and Clara unloaded the crates of vegetables and carried them to the entrance. A man, wearing a blue shirt and 2 short sleeves, a baggy trousers, and was smoking near the doors. He leaned on wooden crutches. His right trouser leg was neatly folded at the knee. The other half of his leg was missing. Clara swallowed a gasp, her feet grinding to a halt, her eyes glued to where his leg once was. She heard Robert disappear inside. The crate Clara was holding tipped in her arms. 2 parsnips and 3 carrots fell onto the pavement. The man with one leg propped a crutch against the wall and rested his cigarette and matches on the rim of his large plant pot next to him. No pockets in these hospital blues, he said, gesturing to his outfit. Can you imagine it? Clara stared at his odd-looking outfit. No pockets. How could a person be expected to travel through a day without them? Remember, she relies on the stuff in her pockets. "You've got a good pair of pockets, I see," the man said, indicating to Clara's apron. His voice was tinged with envy. She glanced down and saw the tip of her envelope from the War Office peeping out of it. By the time she looked up again, the man was bending awkwardly to pick up the fallen parsnips. "Oh, please, there's no need," Clara began to say as the man picked them up and placed them carefully back in her crate. "It's nice to be useful," he said, giving Clara a small smile. "Yes, it is rather," said Clara, smiling back. "Well, thank you." She waited as he bent down to pick up the carrots. Robert strode out the door. His eyes skimmed over the man to the crates in Clara's arms. "Mr. Gilbert is expecting us back within the hour." Clara gave him a small nod. The man picked up his crutch and his cigarettes. Clara's eyes flickered to his leg again. "It doesn't hurt me much, if that's what you're thinking," he said softly, following her gaze. "Oh, no, Clara felt a flash of heat rise up her neck. "It's natural to be curious, and the docs here say it helps to talk about it. And now you've started talking. And now I've started talking. I can't seem to stop. Leg was blown clean off. Nurses in France saved my life. Proper angels they were." "Is that what happened to Christopher? Is that what the letter from the War Office said?" Remember, Christopher's her brother that the letter is about. Clara looked at the man again and, instead of seeing him, saw the dimple in Christopher's chin, the hair like father's, which refused to lie flat unless he greased it, a leg that might or might not have been there anymore. "This is the last of them," Clara heard Robert mutter as he walked past. His back stooped under the weight of the crates. The man was still looking at her as if he wanted to talk. She should go and help Robert, but it would be rude just to walk away. Clara cleared her throat. "Was it very awful? On the front, I mean?" The crate was making her arms ache. She placed it on the pavement and took a step closer to the man. The man's eyes darkened. "You have family there?" Clara nodded. The man's eyes became glassy. He cleared his throat. "It's worse than what they say in the newspapers, which don't tell the whole truth. You can't imagine it unless you've been." "Please, I'd like to know," said Clara, clasping her hands together. The man's Adam's apple, this bit in the man, the bit that sticks out, bobbed in his throat. "The trenches are like a maze. Sometimes the fighting is so terrible that there's no time to bury the dead anywhere else. When it rains, the sides of the trenches collapse, so people's legs and arms and sometimes schools stick out." Clara curled her toes in her boots and tried to quell the sickness which had leaped into her stomach. "The yellow mud gets everywhere. It fills your boots, jams your rifles and guns, makes you so cold you wouldn't think it could get any colder." The man rubbed his neck. "But it was the noises that got me. The air's thick with grenades and mortars. It's like 10 explosions rolled into one. And as for the smell—" "Charlie," said a nurse in a crisp white hat, sticking her head around the front door. "Are you bothering this young lady?" "No, he wasn't, not at all," said Clara, although she was rather glad the nurses had appeared. She had not expected the man to go into quite so much detail. She had learned more from him in a few minutes than she had in all her months since her father returned from the front. He had made it very clear he did not wish to speak of his experiences. Why was this? The nurse ushered Charlie towards the door. He gave Clara a quick wave. "Goodbye," Clara called, "and good luck." The man's cheeks cracked into a broad smile. He tipped his hand to a salute before disappearing through the door. When all the vegetables had been dropped off at the kitchen storeroom and the rosy-faced cook had kissed Robert on both cheeks to thank him for the Earl's generosity, they returned to the cart and Kitty. Robert's eyes flicked to his watch. "I've got a quick errand to run. At the post office. There's no need for you to come. I'll be 10 minutes tops." Kitty was standing contentedly chewing on some parsnips Robert had dropped for her. "Perhaps I could walk to Abbey Gate, find a bakery and buy a bun for each for the journey back?" Clara asked. Robert frowned. "Do you know where to go?" Clara felt in her pockets for the folded tapestry. "I know it. It's just around the corner, back the way we came. I'll be quick." Robert threw a concerned glance at Kitty, then gave Clara a quick but serious nod. "Fine, but don't go telling Mr. Gilbert. I promise not to let you out of my sight." "You can trust me," Clara said, throwing him a broad smile. Towards the end of the street she turned and saw Robert still standing by Kitty, watching her. At the street corner she paused and looked back, But this time Robert was driving off into the opposite direction, with his collar pulled up, his shoulders hunched forwards into a brisk autumn wind, a whirl of fallen leaves dancing in his wake. This one's a short chapter, we'll get it. Chapter 24, Abbey Gate Street. Summer and Son Frame Makers was halfway up the cobbled street, sandwiched between the chemist, its windows displayed full of jars and brightly coloured liquids, and a bakery. Clara ignored the gurge in her stomach, elicited by the scent of freshly baked cinnamon glazed Chelsea buns. That was a mouthful. Making a mental note to buy 3 on the way back, for her, Robert, and for Will. The frame maker's shop bell jangled as Clara pushed the door open. She had half walked, half run all the way there, ignoring the curious gaze of afternoon shoppers, and she had gathered her breath as she stood in the doorway. The maroon-painted walls were covered by a jigsaw of picture frames, delicate ones edged in silver, large wooden ones as big as a window, fancy gilt-edged frames which were thicker than the pictures they would eventually frame. "Hello, higgledy-piggledy puzzled wall," Clara said breathlessly. The shopkeeper behind the counter was talking to a lady in a smart blue hat, explaining the differences between 2 small frames which looked exactly the same to Clara. It seemed the lady thought so too, for she said she could not decide and would return the following week. The shopkeeper sighed and placed the frames under the counter as the lady brushed past Clara and left, the doorbell jingling a quick goodbye. The shopkeeper glanced up at Clara. "Can I help you?" His white cat-like whiskers wiggled as he spoke. He reminded Clara of little Neptune, remember her cat back at home. Clara stepped a little closer to the corner. "You framed a tapestry for Mrs. Gilbert. My aunt." The shopkeeper tilted her head. "Is there a problem with it?" Clara rubbed the bottom of her lip. "There was an accident. The frame broke." She pulled the folded tapestry from her pocket and placed it on the counter. She stood back and watched the shopkeeper's face as he smoothed it out and studied it. "Well," he said, "that's a very fine-looking pineapple. The fabric will need to be stretched out before it can be reframed, though." "Oh, will that take long?" Clara asked. "A day or so. It's not urgent, is it?" Clara dipped her head and stared at her scuffed boots. "I think it may be." "Ah, I see," said the shopkeeper. Clara looked up. He was giving her a friendly smile, as if he understood exactly what type of emergency it was. "When I was small, I broke one of my father's clay pipes, his favourite. The chimney sweep lived next door. I carried the brushes every day until after school until I had enough money to replace it." "I have some money," Clara said. "My parents gave it to me for emergencies." Did they now? "And you think this might be one of those emergencies?" the shopkeeper asked, smoothing his moustache. Clara gave him a small nod. The shopkeeper pulled a large brown ledger from beneath the counter. "You don't happen to remember the date from the back of the frame?" 1914, said Clara quickly. "And the name was Gilbert, you say?" "Mrs. Elizabeth Gilbert," replied Clara, nibbling on a thumbnail. The man flipped through the ledger. It's a big book, with dates in, so he'd know which frame it was. Running a forefinger down the pages, lined with perfect handwriting. "Ah, here we are," he said, jabbing the finger at the page. "Yes, I have all the measurements. He chose cherry wood. A good choice. Oh, there was meant to be an inscription on the front of the frame, but your uncle changed his mind." "My uncle?" said Clara, wrinkling her nose. "Yes, Mr. Gilbert ordered the frame." Clara held onto the countertop. "What was it to say?" The man squinted. "Deep peace of the quiet earth." He swallowed, rubbed his jaw. Clara frowned. It sounded rather gloomy, but also rather nice. It fitted the tapestry quite well, for pineapples did grow peacefully in the soil. She had a sudden longing to be back in the hothouse with Will, where the air was warm and still and sweet. "Would you like the inscription on a brass plate?" the shopkeeper asked, his pen poised in the ledger. "It will cost a little more. I imagine that's why your uncle decided against it." "Deep peace of the quiet earth." "That would be lovely," said Clara, "but I need to check I have enough money first." She pulled her purse from her pocket and tipped the contents onto the counter. The shopkeeper quickly counted the coins and glanced at the ledger again. He tapped a finger on his chin, then pushed half of the coins back across the counter to Clara. "You have more than enough," he said firmly. "Shall I send the package to the Gardner cottage addressed to Mrs. Gilbert?" "Yes, please," said Clara, sweeping the leftover coins back into her purse and pushing it into her pocket. She picked up the piece of paper that had tumbled out of the coins and handed it to him. "Please, can you put this behind the tapestry?" The shopkeeper took it from her and gave her a quick nod, as if it was every day an occurrence to be asked to place a piece of paper bearing the word Maestro between replacement tapestry frames. She walked to the door, but then paused and turned, watching the shopkeeper smoothing out the tapestry. "I don't suppose there's any chance it'll be ready for tomorrow? You see, my aunt doesn't know I've brought it into town," and the shopkeeper looked up and smiled another crinkly smile, which was a little sadder than the first one, and it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Not much call for framing at the moment, what with the war. Both my sons are at the front. Had no news of them for a while. Well, we get the odd letter, but most of the details is censored. You know how it is." Clara gave a serious nod, thinking of the shop sign swinging outside. Summers and Sons. She desperately hoped his sons would return. "I'll see what I can do about getting this tapestry reframed quickly. We can't have you getting into trouble, can we?" the shopkeeper said. Clara smiled her thanks, giving the wall of picture frames a final glance on her way out. It was curious that Mr. Gilbert had ordered the frame. Surely, having sewn the tapestry, Mrs. Gilbert would have wanted a say in the final choice. But then again, perhaps it had been a surprise for her birthday or for Christmas. Whatever the reason, Clara dearly hoped that paying for the brass inscription plate would at least halfway make up for her trespassing in the bedrooms and breaking a precious thing which did not belong to her. And at that, we're going to leave it. So, Robert disappeared in a bit of a suspicious way, but we're not quite sure where he went. But hopefully Clara has been saved of the scolding and the telling off because she's got that frame with the extra little bit at the bottom. But we will see. See you next time.